Well, good morning. And welcome on this beautiful spring day, finally, and happy Mother's Day. My name is Annette Lovell. I am your worship associate today. We are bringing you today's service with the Reverend Kevin Carson and our media tech, Vic Allen. We thank you for choosing to be with us today. We are blessed by your presence, and we are all welcome here. We would like to just start our service with a few business announcements. We do have quite a few today. First of all, a special hello and a welcome to those online. You can make a quick note in the chat box so we can see who you are and where you are. We are very blessed, honestly, to be able to provide online streaming, especially considering our size. So to be able to do both is a real honor. Here in the sanctuary, our joys and concerns are continuing to be written on paper, which will be found at the back of the sanctuary. So fill those out, and we'll gather them up a little bit later. If you are online, you can put them in the chat box, and we will grab them from there. So we are looking for some volunteers to help with our peace garden out front. If you can help weed or water, even for just an hour a week, would you please contact Victoria McDonald? Victoria, when you raise your hand. She is heading up the volunteers for the garden this year. She might have some buyer's remorse at the moment, so she needs some help.
I actually got one person helping.
That's good. More would be nice. The Philosophical Society will be meeting tomorrow, May 15th at 7 o'clock here at the church. The topic is William McCaskill's What We Owe the Future. And that is open to anyone who's interested. Family game night is Friday, May 19th at 5:30. It doesn't matter if you're a family of 1 or 7. You are all welcome to come, have pizza, play games. Just come and hang out together. A comment about the music today. All of the instrumental music has all been written by female composers. It's our way of honoring women today. So take a note of that. So far it's been beautiful. And lastly, please silence your cell phones. And then remember to turn it back on at the end of the service. Now we will prepare for worship for a few moments to sit quietly. I will ring the peace bowl 3 times. So every Sunday we covenant together, striving to be better humans in relationship with ourselves and each other. So please recite the words that you'll find in the order of service. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And our chalice lighting this morning comes from Catherine Colleran. Just as the chalice is lit, let us come together into the sacred space we have created. Let the cares of the day fall away and know that here is a place for quiet reflection, for a pause in our lives, for breathing into our true selves. Let what is said and felt here today add richness to the dimensions of our lives and our spiritual practices. We are strong together in community. We share the experience of being human. So let the warmth of the chalice lit during our time together connect us and carry us into the world.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning comes from Sophia Lyon Fahs. I'll be talking about much more later. We gather in reverence before the wonder of life, the wonder of this moment, the wonder of being together, so close yet so apart, each hidden in our own secret chamber, each listening, each trying to speak, yet none fully understanding, none fully understood. We gather in reverence before all intangible things that eyes see not, nor ears can detect, that hands can never touch, that space cannot hold, and time cannot measure. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, number 42, Morning So Fair to See.
Morning so fair to see, night veiled in mystery, glorious the earth and resplendent skies. Pilgrims we march along, singing our joyous song as through an earthly paradise. Tall are the verdant trees, deep are the flashing seas, glorious each wonder the seasons bring. Pilgrim's face surmise, shining in pilgrim eyes, from which our waking spirits spring. Age after age we rise, 'neath the eternal skies, into the light from the shadowed past. Still shall our pilgrim song, buoyant and brave and strong, resound while life and mountains last.
Good morning. Today's Time for All Ages, the story is called I Love You More. It was written by Laura Duxta and illustrated by Karen Kiesler. And as I read the story, I hope you will see that, like love, it never ends. Walking outdoors one day, a little boy turned to his mother and asked, "Mommy, just how much do you love me?" Surprised at the question, but with no delay, she replied with a smile. So there they are walking. I love you higher than the highest bird ever flew. I love you taller than the tallest tree ever grew. I love you longer than the longest path ever wound. I love you prettier than the prettiest flower ever found. I love you deeper than the deepest fish ever swam. I love you stronger than the strongest big river dam. I love you mightier than the mightiest wind ever blew. I love you fuller than the fullest moon you ever knew. I love you brighter than the brightest star ever shone. I love you more, so much more than you've ever known. Then she wrapped her arms around him with all the love that she had, and he felt it all surround him when he gently whispered, "Know what, Mommy? I love you more." I love you more than anything in the whole wide world. I love you more than anything in the whole wide world. Walking along a path one day, a mother turned to her son and asked, "So, just how much do you love me?" Ready for the question, the little boy took her hand and began. I love you quieter than the quietest caterpillar ever creeped. I love you further than the furthest frog ever leaped. I love you bigger than the biggest bubble ever blown. I love you freer than the freest kite ever flown. I love you higher than the highest swing ever swung. I love you sweeter than the sweetest song ever sung. I love you longer than the longest lollipop ever lasted. I love you louder than the loudest rocket ship ever blasted. I love you taller than the tallest giraffe ever known. I love you more, so much more than you've ever known. Then he wrapped his arms around her with all the love that he had, and she felt it all surround her when she gently whispered, "Know what, son? I love you more." We will now sing out the children.
As we leave this friendly place, love give light to every face. May the kindness which we learn light our hearts till we return.
It's a nice part of the service that we can share what's going in our lives with each other. So we have a sorrow from Pam, just letting us know that Joyce Chambers passed away. She was the mother of Davette and Diane Chambers, Davette Bogart. So. And Pam also has a concern wishing Bob Sealander a speedy recovery after shoulder surgery. Yes, we wish him well. Victoria has a joy. She goes, I appreciate the memories I have of my mother and all us women with children or not who help keep the world together. Yeah. Your mom definitely did keep the world together. She was amazing. Roby and Bob have a joy. They had a great trip to Albuquerque, but they're good to be back. Welcome. Katrina has a joy for all of her children. And Kat has joys. She says Kelsey got on the middle school cheer team. She's going to have another grandbaby in December, and they're going camping next weekend. Love the out of doors. Agreed. Yeah. And I have a few, 2 candles to share, both really of celebration. One is the passing of my brother-in-law, which I know you should not necessarily say to celebration, but we're celebrating a life very well lived. So, and then the other celebration candle is my niece gave birth to twins last night. So, and they're little, but they're well. And we will light one more. Oh, Vic, are there any in the chat box? No. Okay. We will light one more candle that will hold all of our joys, our concerns, and our sorrows.
Our reading this morning is from an essay called On the Equality of the Sexes by Judith Sargent Murray, originally published in March to April 1790 in the Massachusetts Magazine or Monthly Museum of Knowledge and Rational Entertainment. I love that title. I'm not sure what irrational entertainment would be, but so the language is a little 18th century, so bear with me on this. Yes, ye lordly, ye haughty sex, our souls are by nature equal to yours. The same breath of God animates, enlivens, and invigorates us. And that we are not fallen lower than yourselves, let those witness who have greatly towered above the various discouragements by which they have been so heavily oppressed. And though I am unacquainted with the list of celebrated characters on either side, yet from the observations I have made in the contracted circle in which I have moved, I dare confidently believe that from the commencement of time to the present day, there hath been as many females as males who, by the mere force of natural powers, have merited the crown of applause, who, thus unassisted, have seized the wreath of fame. I know there are those who assert that as the animal powers of the one sex are superior, of course their mental faculties must also be stronger, thus attributing strength of mind to the transient organization of this earth-born tenement. But if this reasoning is just, man must be content to yield the palm to many of the brute creations, since by not a few of his brethren of the field he is surpassed in bodily strength. Moreover, with this argument admitted, it would prove too much for ocular demonstration. It evinceth that there are many robust masculine ladies and effeminate gentlemen. Yet I fancy that Mr. Alexander Pope, though clogged with an innervated body and distinguished by a diminutive stature, could nevertheless lay claim to greatness of soul. And perhaps there are many other instances which might be adduced to combat so unphilosophical an opinion. Do we not often see that when the clay-built tabernacle is well nigh dissolved, when it is just ready to mingle with the parent soil, the immortal inhabitant aspires to, and even attaineth heights the most sublime, and which were before wholly unexplored? Besides, were we to grant that animal strength proved anything, taking into consideration the accustomed impartiality of nature, we should be induced to imagine that she had invested the female mind with superior strength as an equivalent for the bodily powers of man. But waiving this, however palpable advantage, for equality only we wish to contend. An offering to support the mission of this church will now be given and gratefully received. Like any religious movement with historic roots going back a few centuries, our story has a lot to say about the famous men whose ideas and actions were crucial to the early evolution of our faith into what it has become today. But until relatively recent, within, say, the last half century or so, the significant role that women played in our story was largely downplayed or ignored. Even though we began ordaining women ministers as early as 1863, by the middle of the 20th century, women still represented a minority of Unitarian and Universalist, and then Unitarian Universalist ministers, a mere 5.4% at the time of merger in 1961. And history attests that our denomination often failed miserably in supporting their work, even being overtly hostile at times. This would radically change, though, and now women make up more than 60% of all UU ministers, and they have served in the highest elected offices in our UU leadership. And while it is good to acknowledge the recent achievements of our female leaders, it is important that we remember the women who were pioneers in the earliest years, women who should be recognized for being among the founding mothers of our faith. So on this Mother's Day weekend, I want to reflect on the lives of two such women who lived in very different times and how they influenced the very soul of our faith. The first is Judith Sargent Murray, who lived between 1751 and 1820. And the second is Sophia Lyon Fahs, who lived between 1876 and 1978. That's right, 102 years. As you might guess from her last name and the dates of her life, Judith Sargent Murray has the notoriety of being the wife of the famous Universalist minister, the Reverend John Murray, who is considered one of the founders of the Universalist Church in America in 1793. But her role as wife barely begins to describe one of the most influential feminists of the age. Born in Gloucester, Massachusetts on May 1st, 1751, Judith Sargent's early education was limited to learning to read and write, as was typical of women in colonial America. Fortunately, she was born into a wealthy merchant family with a substantial library and this allowed her to become self-educated in history, philosophy, geography, and literature. By the age of 9, she was already writing poetry, and she would continue to write for magazines throughout her life, often publishing under the pseudonyms Honora, Martesia, and Constantia, and a male pseudonym, The Gleaner. In 1769, she married a sea captain named John Stevens and adopted his orphan nieces and her cousin. Following the American Revolution, the shipping industry in Gloucester collapsed, and John Stevens fled to the West Indies to avoid debtor's prison, leaving Judith largely to fend for herself. John Stevens died in 1786, and 2 years later, she married the Reverend John Murray, himself a widower, who had spent time in debtor's prison in England. It was Judith's family who donated the land in Gloucester for building the first Universalist church in America in 1780. That congregation, which was first gathered in 1779 by the Reverend John Murray, was then known as the Independent Christian Church, and Murray preached a doctrine of universal salvation. It is still an active congregation to this day, now called the Gloucester Unitarian Universalist Church. One interesting fact about that congregation is the role they played in the separation of church and state in the American Constitution. Since its founding, Massachusetts had designated the Congregationalist Church as the established church, so everyone, regardless of religious affiliation, was expected to pay taxes that went to support the local Congregationalist First Parish. Members of the Independent Christian Church were dissenters who refused to pay taxes to support the First Parish Church, and the local authorities harassed them and even seized personal property in response. Eventually, the congregants sued and won a landmark case in 1786, releasing them from taxation to support the established church. That was 5 years before the Bill of Rights of the Constitution was adopted with its famous Establishment Clause. As a member of that congregation, Judith Sargent Murray was keenly aware of the importance of religious freedom in the new American Republic. Reverend John Murray became rather famous since arriving in America, and during his travels, the Murrays met a variety of notable people of the day, such as George and Martha Washington, John and Abigail Adams, and Benjamin Franklin. Like Abigail Adams, Judith Sargent Murray became an ardent advocate for the education of women, supporting a popular post-revolution idea known as Republican motherhood, the idea that the future of the new nation required intelligent and virtuous citizens. And since the education of patriotic sons was primarily the mother's responsibility, it followed that women should be educated for the good of the country. In addition to homeschooling her own adopted daughters, she assisted her cousin, Judith Saunders and Clementine Beach, in founding a female academy in Dorchester, Massachusetts in 1802. In her many essays, such as On the Equality of the Sexes, which I read from this earlier, Murray challenged the prevailing assumption that the female brain was inherently inferior and that women's subordinate status was due to anything other than the prejudice of a male-dominated society and the lack of educational opportunities afforded to women. Her essays were popular enough to keep the Murray family financially solvent. And after her husband suffered a stroke in 1809, her writing was especially important. After his death in 1815, she completed his autobiography and moved to Natchez, Mississippi, then a rugged frontier town, to live with her married daughter, Julia. It was there that Judith Sargent Murray died in 1820 at the age of 69. As one of America's earliest feminists, her story of advancing our Unitarian Universalist values would be enough to rank her among the mothers of Unitarian Universalism. But one more fact about her solidifies her standing, I think. While homeschooling her children, she wanted to teach them about Universalism in addition to the regular subjects, but soon discovered there were no resources available. She was determined to teach them about a loving, forgiving God in contrast to the vengeful, angry God she had learned about as a young child. So she decided to write a children's educational resource for her own use. When other families at the Gloucester Church heard about it, they wanted to use it for their own children. And so she created the first ever Universalist religious education program. And it is important to note that she openly published it under her own name as a woman in a time when women expressing any sort of religious ideas was frowned upon. She was truly a remarkable woman we should honor and celebrate. The second mother of Unitarian Universalism I want to talk about this morning is Sophia Lyon Fahs, who is undoubtedly the most influential voice in religious education in the history of Unitarian Universalism. Fahs was born in China to Presbyterian missionary parents in 1876, who returned to the United States when she was 3 years old. As she came of age, Fahs became enthusiastic about the progressive educational theories of John Dewey and others that were popular at the turn of the 20th century, especially about encouraging emotional energy and enthusiasm in learning. She attended Columbia University's Teachers College and then was a divinity student at New York's Union Theological Seminary, where she joined the faculty in 1927. In her early work on religious education, Fahs worked with the progressive interdenominational Riverside Church in New York City, shaping their program with her new ideas. Although she would not become a Unitarian until years later, her interest in transforming liberal religious education beyond the teaching of Bible stories, which was the standard of the day even in Unitarian churches, gained her a position in developing new curricula for the American Unitarian Association. Though she considered herself a liberal Protestant Christian and felt that Bible stories were important, she believed the direct experience of feelings about the sacred was more important for the religious education of children in the long run. Far too often, she witnessed older children losing interest in dry, traditional Sunday school classes, ending up as cynical and atheistic in their beliefs. She developed many curricula that were used in Unitarian and later Unitarian Universalist churches for years. And she published over 40 books during her lifetime. She eventually joined a Unitarian church in 1945. And in 1959, at the age of 82, she was given an honorary ordination by the church that is now the Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church in Bethesda, Maryland. Hers was a remarkable career that may never be surpassed, the Tom Brady of religious education, if you will. It would be hard to overstate her influence on Protestant religious education in general. Quoting from a religious education resource on the Unitarian Universalist Association website, for more than 80 years as a professional educator, practical theologian, and author, Fahs strove to create a theology that restored human emotions and human experience to their rightful place as the foundational building blocks for an enlightened liberal faith. Biographer Edith Hunter notes that by the time she was 90 in 1966, Fahs' life had touched 4 distinct theological generations of American Protestantism. One, the period from 1880 to 1905 of missionary enthusiasm with its goal of the evangelization of the world in the present generation. 2, the social gospel movement period from 1905 to 1930, which sought to transform an unjust social order into a just one through the application of the ethics of the historical Jesus. 3, the rise of a new theological orthodoxy between 1930 and 1955, spearheaded by liberal theologians like Reinhold Niebuhr and Paul Tillich, whose idealism sundered by the Great Depression and World War II, turned into a new realism that espoused social justice ethics linked to a traditional conservative assessment of the fallen state of human nature through sin. And finally, 4, the rise of the radical theologians, the new atheists, and the death of God theologians who rejected the notion of a personal God who benevolently intervenes in human affairs. Fahs was a product, an observer, a participant, and to some extent a creator, or more precisely a co-creator with other stellar figures of the modern history of American Protestantism. It was a remarkable career that began in the 19th century and ended in the era of rising feminism. Just imagine the transformation of Unitarian Universalism she witnessed and helped to bring about over those sometimes turbulent decades. She would certainly be on anyone's short list of mothers of Unitarian Universalism. There are so many women we could speak about today if we invested several hours, but we can save those for another time. Unlike the so-called church fathers of Christian history, who are known for their contributions to the development of Christian doctrine in the first few centuries of the faith, the important women and men of Unitarian Universalist history are those who came on the scene at critical points in our story and influenced the theological direction and spiritual evolution of what we call our living tradition. We do not cling to ancient creeds and doctrines that grow irrelevant as society evolves. We owe a debt of gratitude to all the notable contributors to our story, such as Judith Sargent Murray and Sophia Lyon Fahs. They were change makers that brought us to the faith we embrace today. And the story continues to be written. I can think of several contemporary UU women, including trans women, who I believe will be recognized among the important mothers of our tradition. So today, let us remember these 2 exceptional women in our history. Happy Mother's Day to all. I invite you now to rise again in body or spirit and joining singing our closing hymn, number 44, We Sing of Golden Mornings. Our closing words are also from Sophia Lyon Fahs. Some beliefs are like walled gardens. They encourage exclusiveness and the feeling of being especially privileged. Other beliefs are expansive and lead the way into wider and deeper sympathies. Some beliefs are like shadows, clouding children's days with fears of unknown calamities. Other beliefs are like sunshine, blessing children with the warmth of happiness. Some beliefs are divisive, separating the saved from the unsaved, friends from enemies. Other beliefs are bonds in a world community, where sincere differences beautify the pattern. Some beliefs are like blinders, shutting off the power to choose one's own direction. Other beliefs are like gateways, opening wide vistas for exploration. Some beliefs weaken a person's selfhood. They blight the growth of resourcefulness. Other beliefs nurture self-confidence and enrich the feeling of personal worth. Some beliefs are rigid, like the body of death, impotent in a changing world. Other beliefs are pliable, like the young sapling, ever growing with the upward thrust of life.
So I invite you to join with me as we extinguish our chalice flame this afternoon. Please recite with me the words that you will find in the order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. It is time for our postlude. Please join us for coffee and conversation downstairs after the service. Be safe and be well.